Hello and welcome back to Post Traumatic Revelations. I am your host, Afrah Caraballo, and today we are looking at the concept of gatekeepers. What are gatekeepers? Gatekeepers are people or things designed to control access. They control the flow of information, the flow of resources, the movement of people. Gatekeepers are charged with permitting or restricting or denying access. They're defending, protecting, preserving, and when necessary, attacking according to the perceived level of threat or support in question. So, in this episode, we're going inside. We're looking at our internal systems. We're looking within ourselves and exploring the gatekeepers. We're looking at the gatekeepers inside that are controlling access to our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our behaviors. What are the messages and stories we're telling ourselves? What are the messages playing inside? And where do these messages come from? Gatekeepers can be parents, teachers, family, friends, all setting limits, permitting or restricting access to love, support, information, resources, food, fun, whether we belong or we're isolated. Our parents can control who comes and who goes, who can come and visit, where you can sleep over. Your friends can decide if they want to spend time with you or not. Parents can allow or disallow phone calls or give you an allowance or not. So there are different kinds of gatekeepers. Then there are more organizational gatekeepers. So there's like the receptionist at an office building or at a doctor's office. She's going to decide how long it takes you in the waiting room. There's college admissions offices and human resource offices and financial aid offices, welfare offices, and all of these are kind of organizational gatekeepers that determine who gets what, when, where, how. The point is gatekeepers can be put in place to protect us, to restrict us, to defend us, to attack us, based on the perceived level of threat or the perceived level of danger. So, how do we decide what to do, what to say, how to behave, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, what's right, what's wrong, what's dangerous, what's safe? How do we make these decisions for ourselves inside of ourselves? When to speak, when to respond, when to control our behaviors, our thoughts, our actions, our feelings, how to do that. How do we know? Place and space. Our place and space in our homes, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our jobs, in the world, really, our ranking, our perceived sense of self, where we belong, who do we belong with, who do we belong to. These will determine how we think, how we feel, how we behave. We're born absolutely carefree, loving, trusting, easily and freely. And then we're taught. We're taught how to think, how to feel, how to behave. And we learn this by experience. We're taught this by the way our family, our friends, and our community treats us. We learn our place and space in the world based on how we experience it. And then we internalize those experiences and adopt them as our personal truths. Our level of comfort or discomfort will determine our perceived level of safety or danger. Our sense of worth, our perceived value will inform our internal gatekeeper's behavior. How accommodating the gatekeeper is, how restrictive the gatekeeper is. Our sense of self worth determines our internal messages, our internal stories, our narrative. What are we telling ourselves? If you grow up hearing positive, affirming messages, you're so smart, you're so beautiful, you're so strong, you're so capable, you're so courageous. We internalize these messages and they become our truths. And the same is true for negative. So if you're hearing messages of you're worthless, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're never going to amount to anything, you're a waste of time or space, these messages too are internalized. So your perceived place and space at any given situation will determine your need for self control, your internal control. Essentially, it'll determine your need for a gatekeeper. If you were raised in a life of freedom and exploration and adventure and encouragement, that it was okay to fail, it was okay to try and fail and try again, there's not much need for a gatekeeper. But if you're raised with punishment and restriction and obedience and compliance, where there's no room for mistakes and there's no room for adventure or exploring, then chances are there are gatekeepers. And you internalize these messages and you learn how to control yourself. When you're taught that it's okay to communicate your feelings and negotiate your situation, you grow up believing that you have choice. But when you're taught that you should be seen and not heard, that you don't speak unless spoken to, that your thoughts and your feelings do not matter, then you internalize those messages too, and you learn self control. And as you get older, you get really good at assessing. And your assessment of a person, of a room, of a meeting, any interaction will trigger the appropriate level of security, the appropriate level of self control. Your trauma history has a direct effect on the number of gatekeepers you have and their level of control and rigidity, how strict they are, how lenient they are. And the older the trauma is, or the younger you are when you're traumatized, the source or the frequency of the traumatic events you endured, these are all factors in the creation and the assignment of your gatekeepers. For every single traumatic event we ever endure, there is a door. So, for every trauma you go through, there's a door. And on one side of this door is the person you are before the trauma. Your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, your beliefs, your relationships, your perceived place and space in the world is on one side of that door. And then the trauma happens, and there's a door that shuts. And on the other side of that door is the post traumatic you. On the other side of the door is the person you become after the traumatic event. And the more traumatic encounters, the more traumas you endure, the more gatekeepers you have. These gatekeepers are tasked with guarding the doors. They are the beliefs that keep us in line. They're the beliefs that keep us in our place. Their job is to keep things organized, for better or for worse. They are the messages, the stories that tell us no, don't try, be quiet, don't tell, stay out of it, don't make a mess, don't cause trouble. In an attempt to prevent another trauma, in an attempt to keep us out of so called trouble, these gatekeepers restrict our speech, our movements, our behaviors, our thoughts, our feelings. They are the lists of reasons why we can't be free, why we can't be loved, why we can't be loving or trusting, why we shouldn't try. Gatekeepers are what stand between who you are and who you say you want to be. Gatekeepers are the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors, the beliefs that stand between who you were pre trauma and who you became post trauma. Their job is to keep the order. Their work to keep your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in order, to keep you in your place. And I often wonder if we ever remember to ask, our place according to whom? Who decides this place? Does it still serve us to internalize this assigned place and space? So they work at various levels of consciousness, at various levels of ferociousness, fiercely protective, fiercely defending, misguided often. They will attack you and anyone attempting to disturb the order. In extreme cases, these gatekeepers can cause death that looks like suicide or homicide when you're so emotionally overwhelmed and you don't see any other way that these beliefs are so strong and so set that recovery doesn't feel like it's possible, that forgiveness doesn't feel possible, that post traumatic healing and grace doesn't feel possible. These gatekeepers will destroy you, thinking in an attempt to protect you, that you end up living in this self induced prison. And some of these beliefs, some of these gatekeepers are so deep and so old that we don't even realize they're there, that they're working, monitoring, like prison guards, watching who you get close to, who you're moving away from. We don't realize that we're not as free as we once were. Post traumatically, we see, feel, taste, smell, even touch differently. We're not as free as we used to be. We're not as loving, as trusting as we once were. We live guarded. We love guarded. Post traumatically, we even drive guarded. Similar to having a broken arm, we move around guarded. You don't rush out and try to give someone a hug when you have a broken arm, right? Your movements are restricted, they're limited, they're guarded. And the same is true when you have a broken heart, a broken mind, a broken spirit. The same is true when we have emotional or psychological trauma. Remove, guarded. And our gatekeepers help us to do that. But left unattended, though, they become set and rigid. They become a part of our life. Sometimes we just kind of find ourselves withdrawing, and it feels right and it feels natural that we find ourselves saying things like, oh, I just don't drive over there anymore. I just don't drive at night anymore. I just don't do this or I just don't do that anymore. And there's these subtle changes that happen. I just don't like the sound of this or the sound of that. I don't like the smell of this, or I don't like this kind of food anymore, or I don't like the way this looks. I don't like the way that feels. Don't touch me like this. Don't hold me like that. Don't look at me like this. Don't. And there are all these different rules post traumatically, right? And over time, you can find yourself isolated from many of the things you once loved, many of the things you once cared about, many of the people you once cared about. And left unchecked, these gatekeepers can build you a prison. This prison can look like isolation, being withdrawn, avoidance, irritability, hypervigilance. All of these are characteristics of post traumatic stress, post traumatic behaviors, post traumatic disorder. And the gatekeepers, however misguided, are attempting to protect you, support you. Make sure that you're never caught off guard again. Make sure that you are staying safe. But it's important to remember that these internal gatekeepers were created by you, for you, in response to traumatic events. While so many times we can forget that. We can feel like they're taking over our lives. We don't know where these thoughts are coming from, where these beliefs are coming from. Why can't we just do what we want to do? Why can't we just get back to our lives? Well, there has to be a negotiation, right? In a time of horror, terror, helpless, hopeless, we went to these parts of ourselves to survive. We enlisted these gatekeepers to survive, to protect us mentally, psychologically, maybe physically. And so there was a time when they were needed, and maybe they're outdated now. Maybe you no longer need these gatekeepers. Maybe they're inconvenient or intrusive, like an overprotective parent. Maybe you've outgrown them. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But they were created and assigned in a time of extreme distress. And over time, can become increasingly rigid and entitled. And depending on your trauma history, they can be very protective. And again, outdated. But when you've decided you're ready, when you've decided that you're ready to try again, to live again, to love again, to work again, to trust again, you must address your gatekeepers. Some of them are so protective of those traumatized parts of you that they may not allow you to have the life you say you want. Freedom equals danger. Joy, love, success, trust, transparency, all of these sound like everything we want. But to the post traumatic self, they can feel like danger. And so the gatekeepers are tasked with keeping you safe. And if you feel endangered, you got to face the gatekeepers. And so those post traumatic assignments, you have to negotiate with them. You must negotiate for permission to start this recovery process, to start this recovery journey. You must convince each gatekeeper that you are capable of protecting yourself, of managing potential dangers, that you are no longer helpless, hopeless, weak, or small, that you are capable. And so, negotiating your freedom with your internal gatekeepers may sound crazy, but think about it. Only you know where the wounded parts of yourself are. Only you know where that 5-year old is, that 7-year old, that 15 or 17-year old. Only you know where that 20-year old or 30-year old traumatized part of yourself is. And so only you know where the gatekeepers are. Those doubts, those fears, those negative thoughts, those negative beliefs, the judgments, the guilts, the shames, the resistance. Only you know the internal prison. Only you know the internal map, where the traumatized parts are, where the gatekeepers are. And so only you can do this post traumatic work. Only you can do the post traumatic mission. Everyone else, family, friends, therapists, judges, teachers, we can all cheer you on, or we can all distract you. We can believe in you or we can doubt you, but only you can recover those wounded parts of yourself and heal them. And every time my money's on you, I trust you to know who you are, to remember who you are, where you want to go, and negotiate your freedom. to give yourself permission to start the process. Thank you so much again for listening. Thank you for your time and your permission. Thank you for your courage. I look forward to your messages. I look forward to your questions. Until next time, be well.